To the Viscountess Strangford. Dear Lady Strangford, to you I venture to inscribe these volumes. The subject may perhaps recall to you your own wanderings, though the narrative cannot pretend to the color and vivacity of the entertaining Eastern shrines and Egyptian sepulchres. Believe me, yours, and etc., Percy Fitzgerald, London, 1876. The story of the Suez Canal, together with that of its persevering projector, who has finally succeeded in triumphing over all obstacles and all opposition, has ever seemed to contain something romantic, and to be worthy of being made the subject of a regular narrative. The various political divisions described in the title, the political or diplomatic, the engineering or constructive, and the financial, will all be found curious and interesting, as illustrating separate departments of difficulties surmounted by the amazing energy and genius of de Lesseps. To his gifts and labors full justice has scarcely been done. The aim in these volumes has been to furnish a clear, intelligible account of the projector and of his labors, a task, however, of considerable labor and difficulty, owing to the technical character of the various matters treated. In the engineering division, the reader will find a full narrative of the construction based upon the various authentic reports of the engineers and others, and in the financial department, the reader will find all the balance sheets from the commencement of the canal to the present time, with an analysis of the cost, liabilities, and commercial prospects of the undertaking. From M. de Lesseps I have received the most substantial assistance, who has furnished me with every report, account, pamphlet, and discussion that could throw light on the subject. Of these I have made full use, as well as of his 2 recently published volumes, Lettres, Journal et Documents. I am also under obligation to Lord Tenterden of the Foreign Office for assistance of the same kind, as well as to Sir John Hawkshaw, the eminent engineer, who 14 years ago pronounced that the canal was a perfectly feasible project. In whatever aspect we regard the enterprise, whether as a struggle with political powers, or with financial difficulty, or with nature herself, the one figure is seen conspicuously doing battle. With a surprising versatility and strength, and in the end triumphing by these simple forces. Large as these volumes are, they give but an imperfect idea of this amazing spirit and fertility of resource, which was never daunted and seemed to be prepared at all points. The diplomatic contest alone would have seemed sufficient to engross the time and energies of a capable and persevering man, but he was all the time overcoming the engineering and the pecuniary difficulties, tasks quite as great and as engrossing. It is remarkable that the family of this eminent man should have been distinguished in the same way, and have made reputations by their extraordinary display of energy and perseverance. The career of Jean-Baptiste Lesseps, uncle of the hero who brought home despatches from the ill-fated La Pérouse, making a perilous and almost unprecedented journey from Kamchatka, in itself reads like a romance. That of his brother, Matthew, was no less remarkable in Syria, as a controller by force of character of almost barbarous potentates. It may be added that the sons of M. de Lesseps have distinguished themselves as diplomatists and administrators. In reference to the interesting question of the purchase of the shares by England, I have tried to furnish as full a narrative as possible. This step, the suggestion of which came from Mr. Frederick Greenwood, will, by and by, be fruitful of some extraordinary results, and on this ground it is deemed desirable that the public should have already to its hand a complete view of all the transactions connected with the great property in which it has invested so much. To this end, all the official documents have been collected and added in the appendix. Perhaps the most encouraging and picturesque form of struggle, and which commands most sympathy and admiration from the world, will be found to be that of the adventurer, in the honest sense of the term, who enters on some forlorn project that has all the magnificence of a dream, who lives to carry it through, and to be at last successful and triumphant, after being ridiculed and even reviled as a visionary, thwarted, where even some faint glimmerings of success have appeared, he has still held on his way, supported by a faith and an enthusiasm that seem miraculous. He has seen the years go by until life itself has been well nigh spent, his own resources, with those of others who had some half-hearted trust in him, have melted away, until at last he comes to be set down as an intruder, a bore, a disturber of the community at its business. And he is thrust aside rudely, with Richard's speech, "I'm busy, thou troublest me, I am not in the vein." But at last comes the turn, some unexpected stroke of fortune has shown the surpassing merit of the design. Or it may be that such singleness of purpose is really equivalent to strength, and money, and power, and resources. Success is declared and the end gained. Then is invariably seen the humiliating spectacle of a complacent reception of what must now be rejected, and a smiling adoption of a portion. Then is invariably seen the humiliating spectacle of a complacent reception of what must not now be rejected. Then is invariably seen the humiliating spectacle of a complacent reception of what must not now be rejected, and a smiling adoption of a portion, at least, of the honors. The old rebuffs and the scoffs are set to the account of the adventurer's own indiscretion, for the world, it would seem, is too great a personage to be compelled to own to mistakes or to cry peccavi, though it welcomes a discovery, the result of so painful a struggle, and greedily turns to it. Though it welcomes the discovery, the results of so painful a struggle, and greedily turns it to profit. After the first greetings, it gradually becomes cold, and seems to wish that no more should be said about it. The thing now belongs to the age, and etc. It is ill at ease, as it were, like some great man who has prophesied that some one or something would turn out badly, and whom the event has proved to be signally wrong. There are not many of these dramatic instances of hopes long deferred and final success, scarcely half a dozen in all, that of the Jacquard loom and the Argand burner being two of the most curious. But first in interest, on account of the splendor and romantic character of the scheme itself, its gigantic size in proportion to the single enthusiastic heart that carried it through, will always be reckoned the story of Ferdinand de Lesseps, and of the canal which he made across the Isthmus of Suez. This story it is proposed to relate in the following pages. One morning in the month of August, 1854, a French gentleman was engaged in superintending some masons who were at work, adding a story to his house à la Chênaie in Berry, a house once occupied by the famous Agnes Sorel. For the last 2 years, he had been devoting himself to agriculture and country pursuits. His career might indeed be considered as closed, for he had led a busy, stirring life in foreign countries, having filled the various grades of consulship in Tunis, Egypt, Rotterdam, Malaga, and Barcelona, had been minister at Madrid, and finally at Rome. He had shown himself a man of energy and purpose, and for his successful exertions at Barcelona in 1842 to avert a bombardment, had been presented with a gold medal by the resident French and an address of thanks from the municipality. But his chief experience had been gained in the East, where he had made friends and connections, and, with a Frenchman's sympathy, had thoroughly identified himself with the politics and manners of Egypt. After some 25 years' service, he found that his course at Rome was not approved by his government, on which, in 1849, he resolved, apparently in some disgust, to withdraw from the service and claim his retirement. In 1849, he told an audience, in 1870, I was sent by the government on an extraordinary mission to Rome, in conformity with a vote of the Sovereign Assembly. I was to follow a line of conduct determined by that vote. When the legislative replaced the Constituent Assembly, I was asked to follow another line of conduct, which is not for me to blame, but which I could not adopt. Unwilling to betray my mission, I abandoned 29 years of diplomatic service. The name of this gentleman who was directing the Masons was de Lesseps, and as he was about 50 years old, it might be fairly concluded that his career was closed, and that, beyond an occasional cast at the game of politics, open to any Frenchman at any age, life did not offer space for commencing any important undertaking. But his eyes were ever still turned fondly back to the picturesque land of Egypt, and he entertained himself with what could be no more than a dream, a fabric that seemed as baseless of piercing the isthmus of Suez. At the moment almost of his retirement, this project began once more to fill his thoughts. For, indeed, 20 years before, when in Egypt, he had turned over the scheme, and had seen in imagination the waters flowing through the canal and the ships sailing through. He tells us himself how the idea first suggested itself. He had been dispatched from Tunis to Egypt in the year 1831, in a vessel called the Diogenes, commanded by a captain Pilot, and after a miserable voyage of 37 days had reached Alexandria, where he had to remain in quarantine. During his imprisonment, his consul, M. Minault, visited him, and to amuse him brought him Denon's great work on the expedition to Egypt. And finding there the engineers, Lepere, report on the project of the canal, studied it carefully on the consul's recommendation. He then read of all the attempts that had been made to solve the problem from the days of the pharaohs to those of Napoleon. During the years that followed, he frankly owns that he was much attracted by the spectacle of another discouraged but persevering adventurer, who, hoping against hope, used to pass by that way carrying on a vain contest with the cautious stupidity of his age. This was Lieutenant Waghorn. There was a certain resemblance between the persistent efforts of de Lesseps and the heroic perseverance of this projector. Few now recall the most pathetic constancy of the unwearied creator of the overland route. In the face of the most cruel discouragements, our later projector had a generous sympathy for this faithful pioneer and was encouraged by his example. During my first stay in Egypt, in the space between 1831 and 1838, I was greatly struck by the perseverance with which a lieutenant of the Indian Navy, Waghorn, attempted to carry out his project of taking the English mails to India through Suez. At this time, the regular route was by the Cape, and it took from 4 to 6 months. This lieutenant was bent on proving to the English, by practical example, that a direct road to India by the Red Sea was possible. After unheard of efforts, all he could obtain was the privilege of carrying duplicates of despatches to Calcutta at his own cost. 7 years of his life he devoted to this labor. He wasted all his means. He used to scour France and Italy, now sailing from France, now from Italy, starting from Marseille or Trieste, and thus getting to Alexandria. There, without losing an instant, he set out for Suez, either on dromedary back or in a canal boat, and at Suez trusted to chance for meeting a steamer. I used to see him arrive in this way during many years. In his own country he passed for a man with a craze. Yet he had undertaken a project which he had worked out with courage and devotion, had ruined his health and his fortunes, and had left his family to beggary. But for the generosity of the Peninsular and Oriental Company, who awarded them a pension. He had, however, succeeded in proving that a single person carrying the despatches could arrive by this route at his destination. An inquiry was conducted by the Bombay government as to the possibility of steamers navigating the Red Sea. The English Parliament examined various men of professional experience and politicians, admirals, and particularly the politicians, pronounced solemnly that though sailing vessels might make their way, it was impossible for steamers to do so. There may be a little exaggeration here, but many years later, the Edinburgh Review authoritatively promulgated the reverse of this statement, declaring that sailing vessels could not safely navigate the Red Sea, and that though steamers might, they would not pay. Both modes, therefore, were out of the question. It was Lieutenant Waghorn, nevertheless, that opened up the route to India overland. He showed that it could be done, and that it was the courage he exhibited that left a deep impression on my mind and served as an example.